very much for inviting me to come tonight, but I'll clarify a couple things before we start. If you look on your agenda tonight, line 7, in parentheses, history of the St. Louis Fire Department. Now, when Eric talked to me about this, he said, would you come talk to us about the fire department? He did not specify what fire department, so we're going to touch on several of them through the evening. So you're kind of at my mercy on that one. He also asked about significant St. Louis fires. He failed to define significant, so you're at my mercy on that. I also asked him, how long would you like me to do a presentation? He said, 20 minutes to a half hour is fine. He failed to say which half of what hour, so you're also at my mercy. It's been several years since I talked to you a little about the fire department. History hasn't changed a lot in that span of time, so some of it may be familiar to you. Also, if you have read the chapter in the St. Louis Sesquicentennial book about the fire department, a lot of this material is contained there also. But the fire department is very near and dear to me, even though I'm kind of a newcomer to St. Louis, moving here in 1975. So what I know about the fire department is what I have heard, what I have read, and under the tutelage of Captain Church and Chief Parsons here, picked up a lot of information about the fire department over the years. As far as significant fires, everybody likes to see a fire and wonders what's going on. So we'll start off with a great fire. This was May 4th, 1887. The city jail burned. Now I'm sure there was a segment of society in St. Louis, even in 1877, that found it good news the jail burned. But there was one person profoundly upset about it, and his name was George Lott. He was from Elm Hall. Now, why would he be concerned about the St. Louis jail burning? He had been arrested for larceny. He was an occupant of the jail. He suffered capital punishment as a result of that fire. So, even though some people were happy to have the jail gone, Mr. Lott suffered great consequences for it. Fire protection in St. Louis really was kind of a latecomer. The village was organized in the 1850s. There was no formal fire protection available until around 1870, when they organized a system of fire wardens. They had 3 men designated fire wardens for a period of about 3 years, and it changed each year with the exception of Albert Earl. He served 3 years as fire warden, and when the Citizens Engine Company was formed in 1873, he took over as foreman of that. Now, what does a fire warden do to offer fire protection? He patrols the town. When he finds a fire, he sounds the alarm. You're in 1871. How are you going to sound the alarm? You don't have any alarm, horn up here on the river. You don't have cell phones, pagers, with a bell on a tower. How is a warden going to sound an alarm for a fire? He might rattle. And then he'd yell, "Turn out, boys! Turn out, boys!" Now you listen to that thing, you think, that's not very loud. If I'm inside my house down here and you're out on the street doing that, I'm probably not going to hear it. Well, let's go back to 1871. You didn't have thermal pane windows. You didn't have nice, tight-fitting doors. Your house probably had no insulation. No television, no radio, no traffic going by. You didn't have your air conditioner running, your furnace running. You might have had a clock ticking, and it might cuckoo once in a while. But when the guy out on the street shakes his rattle, you may hear it, you may not, but the neighbor's pig might. And in 1871, your neighbor may have a pig in the backyard. You may have chickens, they may get a little stirred up. Everybody's dog is going to bark. And what happens when there's commotion in the neighborhood today? Everybody heads for the window or the door to see what's going on, don't they? Not a lot different than 1871. And so by shaking the rattle, calling out, your fire warden would get the attention of the neighborhood, and all the good men and boys would turn out to fight the fire and bring their equipment with them. What equipment did they bring? Buckets! Fire buckets! I mean, any well-prepared home would have a fire bucket. How are you going to fight a fire? Just like today, if you're a well-prepared home, you have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, right? In those days, everybody had a bucket. This one's pretty plain. I can't afford the fancy ones. But you see fancy ones that are painted with crests or with names and numbers. Because when they went to the fire, it didn't matter whose bucket it was, they just used it and they threw water. The buckets ended up in a heap. When the fire was done, you sorted your bucket out by your name, you took it home and you hung it up by the door. So the next time you woke up to the chickens calling, the pigs squealing, the dogs barking, and some guy shaking the thing and hollering, you could grab your bucket and go to the fire. So that was a period of about 3 years. And then around 1873, the Citizens Engine Company was formed. And they purchased a hand pumper from Bay City. It was a 40 manpower pumper. That's a pretty good pumper. How do you figure manpower on a pumper?
How many men used it?
Yeah, they stood in line on either side, didn't they, with a big long bar, and they pumped. 20 men to a side, that's a pretty good pumper. Well, that pumper was a good pumper because a couple of the early fire chiefs were parties to organizing the Michigan State Firemen's Association in the 1870s. And at their annual convention, that pumper, 2 years in a row, won the state banner for throwing the longest stream. They could shoot a stream of about 216 feet with a 20 manpower pumper. It doesn't tell me what size of nozzle they had, but they obviously had to pump pretty good to get that kind of a stream out of it. So we sound the alarm, we fight the fire, away we go. Another interesting fire, March 24th, 1888. Now this is for all the people that don't like to pay taxes. Village Hall burned. So that was good news for the people that don't like to pay taxes. Bad news is in 1888 they did have an engine house to store the pumper. The engine house burned. Wasn't all the bad news, 16 other buildings burned too. Now that's a pretty big conflagration for 1888. Taxes your manpower. If we had 16 buildings in St. Louis burning today, how many departments would we have to call to try and control that? We'd empty the county, we'd invite Isabella and probably Vestaburg and maybe some of Saginaw County as well to come help. In 1888, that was a pretty big issue. A lot of it was standing back, determining where might we stop it and let it burn to that point. The Citizens Engine Company was around from 1873 until around 1881 or 1882 when the St. Louis Fire Department was actually organized. And I don't know that this dates specifically to 1881-82, but this is the Constitution. This organization shall be known as the St. Louis Fire Department of St. Louis, Michigan. And it goes through and it talks about who the officers, what officers would be, how they would be appointed, what their duties were. I like the steward's job, if I can find it quickly here. His job was to see the fireman's hall is properly cleaned and warmed before each meeting of the department. You talk about cutting the heat back to save money. There wasn't any fire built until they were going to use the hall, and then the steward had to come in and warm the place up for them. But that was in 1881, 1882 approximately when the St. Louis Fire Department was organized. When we deal with those early times, it's a little confusing because there was a Citizens Engine Company and there are also reports of Citizens Hose Company, two different departments. And when you start researching who was the fire chief here or there, you start coming up with two names for the same period of time. Well, was it poor record keeping or was it two departments? And in that era and earlier times, it was not uncommon that if I wanted fire protection for my home, I might go to the Citizens Engine Company and say, I want you to take care of my house if I have a fire. And they'd say, okay, it's going to cost you $20 a year. I pay my $20, they give me a little sign, I go nail to the front of the house right next to the front door. And if I have a fire, they'll come and they'll see the sign and say, yep, he paid for fire protection, we'll put his fire out. However, if I have contracted with Citizens Engine Company and I have a fire and somebody alerts Citizens Hose Company, they come over and they look and say, that's not our sign. Guess what they do? They leave.